Good Thursday morning, everyone, and a good day to talk a little bit about Crowley's brilliant little introduction to the Tarot and to Kabbalah in his Book of Thoth. I was thumbing through it in the parking lot of Trader Joe's just a few minutes ago. We're shopping in the cool of the day before it gets. We're due to be 111 today here in Sacramento, but I'm sure it's hot wherever you are too. So let's change the subject to something cool. I grabbed this book to look in the parking lot this morning. I grabbed it just because it was blue and it looked cool. Okay. But it is cool. It's very, very, very cool. But before we do that, I want to share with you something that many people may think is secret Masonic work, and even many Masons may think that this is secret stuff. But it isn't. It isn't. It is part of a Masonic ritual and a lecture within a certain ritual of the Blue Lodge. But it is one of those sections which we refer to as monitorial. So monitorial is it can be typed out in plain English or whatever the vernacular is. It doesn't have to be coded. Much Masonic work to aid the memory is coded so that the officers can memorize the secret stuff. But there's other stuff that's monitorial. And it's good stuff. And it is the reason why knowledgeable Masons will tell you, well, yes, there are secrets in Masonry, but all the secrets are really the kind of the claptrap and the signs of recognition and things like that to sort of prevent non-Masons from pretending to be Masons, okay? Signs, grips, words, things like that really don't mean anything. The real important stuff, like all true important stuff, is out there. It's free. And in this case, Masonry is meant to share this this science, this math, this geometry with the world. So here is something, and believe me, it has relevance. And I'm not going to share the context to which this little lecture is given, but it treats on the importance of geometry. Okay. Now, everybody has seen the Masonic symbol of the square and the compass, or the compass and square. And in many cases, especially in the United States, we see a big G in the middle. Now, we're not told, other than in the most generic terms, that it stands for the deity. Nothing is said, but it's strongly hinted that geometry is a good candidate for what that G means. But it's also obvious to those that really dig into the esoteric side of geometry and and solids and existence and everything else, that the golden mean, the golden spiral, that is often referred to as the fingerprint of God, that the nautilus shell thing when you stir your coffee, it's a universal thing. It's a stamp of existence as we know it, is a pretty damn good candidate for that G, okay? But anyway, they're talking about geometry here. Geometry treats on the powers and properties of magnitudes in general, where length, breadth, and thickness are concerned. From a point to a line, from a line to a superficie or a plane, and from a superficie to a solid. A point has beginning. A point is the beginning of all geometrical matter. A line, in order for us to draw a line, we need 2 points. A line has length and breadth without thickness. Excuse me. A line has length without breadth or thickness. A superficie, and in order to do a superficie, we have to create a third dot and connect those. A superficie has length and breadth without thickness. In other words, it's a plain, flat thing with no thickness whatsoever, but it's a plain surface. But a solid, okay, a solid, that would mean a fourth point that's above or below. There is no above or below the superficie. And if we connect those lines, and it's hard to see this, but I've created a superficie, like a pyramid, a tetrahedron. A solid has length, breadth, and thickness. Then it goes on, talks about architecture, things like that. Very nice. Okay, it's truly a no-brainer, but it's a no-brainer that here is my homemade tetrahedron here that I just that I just made. So if we look at the point to the line, from a line to a superficie, there isn't any stuff yet. It's only when the fourth point is created do we have a solid, do we have stuff. And of course in Kabbalah and tarot and things like that, this fourness is really important. Four is the first sephira, or emanation below the abyss. And the 1, 2, and 3, Kether, Hokmah, Bina, on the tree of life, are sort of like the point, the line, the superficie, okay? But stuff that we can wrap our brain around in space-time doesn't start until 4. And you can understand how 4 would think itself really important, because it's here. And it's totally here in a here-ness that is separated from the 3 concepts that created it. 4 is God, or at least it's a God that thinks it's a God, because it looks around in its little dimension, space-time, and says, I don't see anybody else up here. I'm the top point of a tetrahedron, and I have no idea what the three concepts that came before me are. All I know is I'm here. And so that number 4 is the demiurgos. Okay, it's the 4. That's the great 4-letter name of God, Yod He Vav He. And Yod He Vav He is also the sphere of Jove, Jupiter, Zeus, the god that thinks it's a god, but isn't a god, but becomes the father of all the other gods, the gods that will be in 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and finally manifest as 10. And of course, 10 is 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. But I digress. I just wanted to share with you a little thing from the Book of Thoth. If you don't have a Book of Thoth, oh, please get a Book of Thoth. It'll be your friend for the rest of your life. Okay. I'm starting on toward the very beginning here, page 12. The Tarot and the Holy Kabbalah. The next issue is the Holy Kabbalah. This is a very simple subject and presents no difficulty to the ordinary intelligent mind. He says that for our great comfort. There are 10 numbers in the decimal system, and there is a genuine reason why there should be 10 numbers, and only 10. In a numerical system which is not merely mathematical, but philosophical. It's necessary at this point to introduce the Naples arrangement. But first of all, one must understand the pictorial representation of the universe given by the Holy Kabbalah, and he refers to the Tree of Life diagram. This picture represents the Tree of Life, which is a map of the universe. One must begin, as a mathematician would, with the idea of zero, absolute zero, which turns out on examination to mean any quantity that one may choose, but not, as the layman may first suppose, nothing in the absence of anything, vulgar sense of the word. Okay. Under the title, The Naples Arrangement. The Kabbalists expand this idea of nothing and got a second kind of nothing, which they call Ein Sof, without limit. This idea seems not unlike that of space. They then decide that in order to interpret this mere absence of any means of definition, it was necessary to postulate the Ein Sof Or, the limitless light. By this they seem to have meant very much what the late Victorian men of science meant, or thought that they meant, by the luminous aether. And then in parentheses he says, the space-time continuum. All this is evidently without form and void. These are abstract conditions, not positive ideas. The next step must be the idea of position. One must formulate this thesis. If there is anything except nothing, It must exist within this boundless light, within this space, within this inconceivable nothingness, which cannot exist as nothingness, but has to be conceived of as nothingness, composed of the annihilation of two imaginary opposites. Thus appears the point, which has neither parts nor magnitude, but only position. But this position does not mean anything at all unless there is something else, some other position with which it can be compared. One has to describe it. The only way to do this is to have another point, like DuQuette just did. And that means that one must invent the number 2, making possible the line. But this line does not really mean very much because there is yet no measure of length. The limit of knowledge at this stage is that there are 2 things, in order to be able to talk about them at all. But one cannot say that they are near each other or they are far apart. One can only say they are distant. In order to discriminate between them at all, one must create a third thing. We must have another point. One must invent the surface, the superficie. One must invent the triangle. In doing this, incidentally, appears the whole plane of geometry. One can now say A is nearer to B than A is to C. But so far, there is no substance to these ideas. In fact, there are no ideas at all, except the idea of distance, and perhaps the idea of betweenness, and of angular measurement. So that plane geometry, which now exists in theory, is after all completely inchoate and incoherent. There has been no approach at all to the conception of a really existing thing. No more has been done than to make definitions, all in a purely ideal and imaginary world. Now then comes the abyss. One cannot go any further into the ideal. The next step must be the actual, at least an approach to the actual. There are 3 points, but there is no idea of where any one of them is. A 4th point is essential, and this formulates the idea of matter. Where's my little tetrahedron? I don't know where it is. The point, the line, the plane. The 4th point, unless it should happen to lie in the plane, gives the solid. If one wants to know the position of any point, one must define it by use of 3 coordinate axes. It is so many feet from the north wall, and so many feet from the east wall, and so many feet from the floor. Thus there has been developed from nothingness a something which can be said to exist. One has arrived at the idea of matter. But this existence is exceedingly tenuous. For the only property of any given point is its position in relation to certain other points. No change is possible. Nothing can happen. One is therefore compelled, in the analysis of known reality to postulate a fifth idea, which is that of motion. This implies the idea of time, for only through motion and in time can an event happen. Without this change and sequence, nothing can be the object of sense. And in parentheses, he says, it's to be noted that this number 5 is the number of He in the Hebrew alphabet. This is the letter traditionally consecrated to the Great Mother. It is the womb in which the Great Father, who is represented by the letter Yud, which is pictorially the representation and ultimately the point. It is the womb in which the Great Father moves and begets active existence, Yod-He. There is now possible a concrete idea of the point, and at last it is a point which can be self-conscious, because it can have a past, and a present, and a future. It is able to define itself in terms of previous ideas. Here is the number 6, the center of the system, self-conscious, capable of experience. At this stage, it is convenient to turn away for a moment from the strictly Kabbalistic symbolism. The doctrine of the next 3 numbers, to some minds at least, is not very clearly expressed. One must look to the Vedanta system for more lucid interpretations of the numbers 7, 8, and 9. Although they correspond very closely to the Kabbalistic idea, in the Hindu analysis of existence, the rishis, or sages, postulate 3 qualities: Sat, the essence of being itself; Chit, thought, or intellection; and Ananda, usually translated bliss, the pleasure experienced by being in the course of events. This ecstasy is evidently the exciting cause of the mobility of pure existence. It explains the assumption of imperfection on the part of perfection. The absolute would be nothing, would remain in the condition of nothingness. Therefore, in order to be conscious of its possibilities and to enjoy them, it must explore these possibilities. One may here insert a parallel statement of this doctrine from a document called the Book of the Great Auk, to enable the student to consider the position from the standpoint of 2 different minds. Quote, all elements must at one time have been separate. That would be the case in great heat. Now, when the atoms get to the sun, we get that immense extreme heat, and all the elements are themselves again. Do you remember what the last words of the Emerald Tablet were? Do you remember that from yesterday? Where'd it go? This is all I've said concerning the operation of the sun. Something like that. Okay. But I digress. Sorry, I get excited there. Let's see. Now, when the atoms get to the sun, we get that immense extreme heat, and all the elements are again themselves. Imagine that each atom of each element possesses the memory of all his adventures in combination. By the way, that atom, fortified with memory, would not be the same atom. Yet it is, because it has gained nothing from anywhere except this memory. Therefore, by the lapse of time and by virtue of memory, a thing could become something more than itself. Thus, a real development is possible. One can then see the reason for any element deciding to go through this series of incarnations. Because so, and only so, can he go. And he suffers the lapse of memory which he has during these incarnations, because he knows he will come through unchanged. Therefore, you can have an infinite number of gods, individual and equal though diverse, each one's supreme and utterly indestructible. This is also the only explanation of how a being could create a world in which war, evil, etc. exists. Evil is only an appearance, because, like good, it cannot affect the substance itself, but only multiply its combinations. This is something the same as mystic monotheism. But the objection to that theory is that God has to create things which are all parts of himself, so that their interplay is false. If we presuppose many elements, their interplay is natural. That was the quote from the great Hauk. These ideas of being, thought, and bliss, Sat Chit Ananda, constitute the minimum possible qualities which a point must possess if it is to have a real sensible experience of itself. These correspond to the numbers 9, 8, and 7. The first idea of reality, as known by the mind, is therefore to conceive of the point as built up of these previous 9 successive developments from 0. Here then at last is the number 10. In other words, to describe reality in the form of knowledge, one must postulate these 10 successive ideas. In the Kabbalah, they are called Sephiroth, which means numbers. It's also translated emanations. As will be seen later, each number has a significance of its own. Each corresponds with all phenomena in such a way that their arrangement in the tree of life, as shown in the diagrams later in the book, is a map of the universe. These 10 numbers are represented in tarot by the 40 small cards. And that would be the ace through 10 of each of the 4 suits, Yod, He, Vav, He. Anyway, I know that might have sounded dry to many of you, but the Book of Thoth is a weird book. Okay, I've had the Book of Thoth in one edition or another for many years. Okay, 50. And I've read it many times, and I've referred to it thousands of times, especially when I was writing Understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot. It's a magic book. Okay, I say this without embarrassment or hesitation. It's a magic book. Crowley threw it together toward the very end of his life. The words seem to actually morph into other words between readings. You swear you read things in it. I never read that before. Oh my God, that makes sense to me. Because it changes, like all magic books. It changes as you change. It grows as you grow. It unfolds as you unfold. So if it's been a while since you've read the Book of Thoth, dust it off. Find someplace cool. Get an iced tea. Put your feet up. Read it again. And if you don't want to read it cover to cover, thumb through it. It's a freaking oracle. That's it for today. That's my Thursday soapbox sermon. I hope to be here tomorrow. If not, there may just be a puddle here. But Constance and I are doing okay. We're almost making an adventure of this, and I'm so lucky to have someone, a partner to experience our adventure, to create our memories. Until tomorrow, continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.